Carl Jung discovered a psychological type so rare that only 1% of humanity possesses it. He called them the Introverted Intuitives. And here's what terrified him most about his discovery. These people see patterns that escape everyone else, feel emotions that others can't detect, and carry a burden of consciousness that society wasn't built to understand. If you've ever felt like an alien in your own family, like you're speaking a different language than everyone around you, Jung believed you might be part of humanity's most dangerous and necessary evolution. Jung spent decades documenting this rare type in his Zurich clinic. What he discovered changed everything we thought we knew about human consciousness. These individuals weren't suffering from disorders. They were experiencing advanced perception that collective society couldn't yet integrate. Today, I'll reveal the 8 signs that Jung identified across hundreds of cases. Signs that confirm you're part of this 1%. Signs that explain why your entire life has felt like you're living in a world designed for someone else. Jung's breakthrough came in 1913, during his own psychological crisis, following his split from Freud. A patient walked into his clinic, representing what he would later call the rarest personality configuration in human psychology. She possessed what Jung termed undifferentiated intuitive perception. This woman could enter any room and immediately sense the complete psychological atmosphere. She detected lies before people finished speaking. She felt emotional pain that others successfully hid. She perceived unconscious tensions that kept groups functioning through denial. Jung wrote in his private notes, "The patient displays an extraordinary capacity for perceiving unconscious contents in others, but this faculty appears to cause her considerable distress, rather than advantage. She couldn't engage in small talk because she saw through every social mask. She couldn't maintain friendships because people felt uncomfortably exposed around her. She couldn't hold employment because her presence disrupted the collective unconscious agreements that organizations require to function smoothly." Jung realized something revolutionary. He wasn't treating mental illness. He was observing what happens when consciousness becomes too advanced for social survival, when perception becomes so differentiated that it separates you from collective participation. This discovery would haunt him for the rest of his career, because Jung understood that these individuals held the key to humanity's psychological evolution. But first, they had to survive the isolation that came with seeing everything. The first sign Jung identified appears as what he called the paradox of empathy. You feel everyone's emotions with physical intensity, yet you often need to detach coldly just to survive daily life. This isn't contradiction, it's psychological necessity. Jung documented patients who described walking into rooms and immediately feeling crushed by emotional atmospheres that others couldn't detect. One patient told him, "I can feel my mother's depression before I see her face. I absorb my colleagues' anxiety during meetings until I can't remember my own emotional state. I carry everyone's unspoken pain like physical weight on my chest." Modern neuroscience has confirmed what Jung observed clinically. Research by Dr. Elaine Aron on highly sensitive persons shows that roughly 20% of people have heightened sensory and emotional sensitivity. But Jung identified something more specific. The introverted intuitive doesn't just feel deeply. They unconsciously absorb emotional content from their environment through what Jung called participation mystique. This creates an impossible situation. You feel everything with devastating intensity. But to function in normal society, you must develop what appears to be cold detachment. People call you heartless when you create boundaries. They accuse you of being uncaring when you protect yourself from emotional flooding. They don't understand that your detachment isn't cruelty, it's survival. Jung called this emotional contagion. Your nervous system hasn't developed normal filtering mechanisms that allow most people to remain separate from others' emotional states. You absorb joy, depression, anxiety, and rage from everyone around you. Then society punishes you for being too sensitive when you finally collapse under the weight of emotions that were never yours to carry. What makes this paradox even more painful is the constant misunderstanding you face. When you're warm and open, people become dependent on your empathy. They drain you completely, then call you selfish when you finally protect yourself. When you set boundaries to survive, those same people accuse you of being cold and unfeeling. You can't win. Every choice leads to judgment, because people only see one side of your necessary paradox. The second sign reveals itself as what Jung termed future memory. You remember the future. You predict relationship outcomes months before they unfold. You sense career disasters before any obvious warning signs appear. Jung discovered this wasn't mysticism. It was pattern recognition operating at unconscious levels. Jung documented patient after patient describing this phenomenon. They would meet someone new and immediately know how the relationship would end. They'd start a job and sense within days that it would fail, despite everything appearing perfect on the surface. They'd observe family dynamics and predict divorces, breakdowns, and betrayals that seemed impossible to others. Empaths aren't broken, they're alchemists in progress. The Alchemist's Path gives you drills, Jung-based boundaries, and 3 exclusive chapter videos to turn overwhelm into clarity. By Surreal Mind, 236-page downloadable ebook, in stock. Begin now at thesurrealmind.com. 1. Of Jung's patients described it perfectly. I don't see the future through visions or prophecy. I see patterns. When I meet someone, I observe thousands of micro-behaviors that reveal their character structure. My unconscious mind processes this information faster than conscious thought. By the time I finish our first conversation, I already know who they really are and how our story will end. Jung realized this wasn't supernatural ability. The introverted intuitive has developed what he called differentiated intuitive function. Their brains process not just obvious social cues, but unconscious patterns that predict behavior. They see the affair before it happens because they detected the emotional distance months earlier. They predict the business failure because they sense the leadership's incompetence beneath confident presentations. The tragedy is that nobody believes them until their predictions prove accurate. They're called pessimistic when they're simply realistic. They're accused of creating problems when they're merely observing patterns that already exist. Jung watched his patients suffer the special torture of seeing disasters approach, while everyone dismissed their warnings as negativity. And when their predictions inevitably come true, people don't apologize for doubting them. Instead, they often blame them for somehow causing the outcome through negative thinking. This compounds the isolation. You learn to stop sharing what you see because being right about terrible things only makes people resent you more. Sign 3 appears as what Jung documented as the human lie detector phenomenon. You don't just suspect dishonesty, you physically react to it. Your body becomes a biological truth sensor that you can't turn off. Jung's patients described feeling nauseous around deceptive people. One patient told him, "When someone lies to me, I feel it in my stomach before my mind processes their words. My chest tightens, my breathing changes. It's not psychological discomfort, it's physical illness from being around false personas." Modern research on mirror neurons helps explain what Jung observed. Highly intuitive individuals have more active mirror neuron systems. These brain structures allow you to unconsciously simulate others' internal states. When someone presents a false self, your mirror neurons detect the disconnect between their external presentation and internal reality. This neurological mismatch creates physical discomfort. But here's what made this phenomenon so devastating for Jung's patients. Most people present false personas constantly. Social survival requires masks, performance, and strategic self-presentation. The introverted intuitive can't tolerate this normal social theater. Every cocktail party becomes physical torture. Every workplace interaction triggers biological stress responses. You're not being judgmental. Your body is simply responding to the psychological dishonesty that others navigate effortlessly. Jung wrote, "The curse of clear perception is that you cannot unsee what you see." These individuals cannot pretend not to notice lies, manipulation, and false presentations that lubricate social functioning. Their physical reactions betray them constantly, and society punishes them for their inability to participate in collective denial. The worst part is that you start doubting your own reactions. When everyone else seems comfortable with someone who makes you physically ill, you wonder if something is wrong with you. You force yourself to ignore your body's warnings, and later, when that person's deception becomes obvious to everyone, you realize your body was protecting you all along. But by then, you've trained yourself to distrust your most accurate guidance system. The fourth sign manifests as what Jung called the social chameleon pattern. You unconsciously mirror others to make them feel safe, often losing your own identity completely in the process. Jung documented this phenomenon extensively. His introverted intuitive patients describe becoming different people with different individuals. With their anxious friend, they'd become calm and reassuring. With their domineering boss, they'd become submissive and agreeable. With their depressed partner, they'd become artificially cheerful to balance the emotional atmosphere. This isn't conscious manipulation. Jung called it participation mystique, a state where your psychological boundaries dissolve and you merge with others' emotional needs. You automatically adjust your personality, energy level, and even your beliefs to create comfort for whoever you're engaging with. One patient described the horror of this pattern. "I've been so many different versions of myself for so many different people that I no longer know who I actually am. When I'm alone, I feel empty, ill, like my personality only exists as a response to others' needs. I've spent my entire life being the perfect mirror for everyone around me, and now there's nothing left when I look at my own reflection." Jung recognized this as the dark side of superior empathy. You're so skilled at reading what others need that you automatically become what they need. But this talent comes with a devastating cost. You lose contact with your authentic self. You become addicted to others' approval because you've built your entire identity on being whatever makes others comfortable. The social chameleon experiences life as an endless performance where the applause validates their existence, but underneath the masks lives a terrifying emptiness. Jung worked for years helping these patients rediscover their authentic personalities beneath layers of adaptive personas built to please others. The recovery process Jung developed required these patients to spend extended time in complete solitude. Not loneliness, but chosen isolation, where no one's emotional needs could hijack their sense of self. Only in that space could they begin to distinguish between their authentic impulses and their automatic mirroring responses. Sign 5 appears as what Jung extensively documented as the scapegoat phenomenon. You become the target of shadow projection. People unconsciously attack you because you reflect the parts of themselves they refuse to acknowledge. Jung spent decades studying psychological projection. He discovered that the introverted intuitive becomes a natural screen onto which others project their denied shadow contents. Because you see clearly, you reflect back what people hide from themselves. And humans have two choices when confronted with their shadows: integrate what they see or destroy the mirror, showing them the reflection. Jung documented this pattern across hundreds of cases. His patients consistently became the identified problem in every group they joined. Families blamed them for creating tension they were merely observing. Workplaces accused them of being negative when they pointed out obvious dysfunctions. Friend groups excluded them for being judgmental when they simply reflected back the behavior they witnessed. One patient described the psychological violence of this pattern. "I've been called toxic by people who lie constantly. I've been accused of being dramatic by people who create chaos everywhere they go. I've been labeled negative by people who refuse to acknowledge any problem until it explodes. I'm not the problem. I'm the mirror, and people hate mirrors that show them clearly." Jung called this the scapegoat phenomenon. The person with clear perception becomes the repository for everything the group cannot consciously acknowledge about itself. They carry the collective shadow, and groups maintain their cohesion by systematically excluding or attacking the one person who threatens their comfortable denial. Jung observed that his introverted intuitive patients didn't just feel misunderstood. They felt systematically targeted by forces they couldn't rationally explain. Now we understand why. They were experiencing collective shadow projection, an unconscious group process where the most perceptive member gets sacrificed to maintain everyone else's psychological comfort. The pattern follows a predictable sequence. First, you're welcomed into the group because your empathy and perception seem valuable. Then, as you inevitably reflect back uncomfortable truths, the group begins to turn against you. Finally, you're expelled or you leave, and the group immediately feels relief. They've successfully externalized their shadow content onto you and eliminated the threat to their denial system. The sixth sign reveals itself as what Jung termed existential isolation. You don't just feel lonely. You feel like you're speaking a completely different language than everyone around you. Jung called this the curse of consciousness. Jung's patients described a unique form of suffering that went beyond normal loneliness. One patient told him, "I can be surrounded by people and feel more alone than when I'm by myself. It's not that I dislike people. It's that I seem to experience reality at a completely different frequency than everyone around me. When I try to share what I see, what I feel, what I understand, people look at me like I'm speaking a foreign language." Jung documented this as perhaps the most devastating aspect of superior perception. The introverted intuitive experiences consciousness at levels that cannot be shared with those who don't possess similar awareness. You see patterns in human behavior that others miss entirely. You feel emotional textures that others navigate unconsciously. You perceive meaning and significance in experiences that others find mundane. This creates what Jung called ontological loneliness, not the loneliness of missing someone, the loneliness of existing in a different reality than the people around you. You can have friends, family, and partners, but underneath every connection lives the awareness that they cannot access the world you inhabit. They cannot see what you see. They cannot feel what you feel. They cannot understand the weight you carry. Jung wrote, "The curse of differentiated consciousness is that it cannot be shared with those who do not possess it." The individual becomes an island of awareness in an ocean of unconsciousness. This isolation isn't social, it's existential, and it can drive even the strongest person to question their sanity. Sign 7 manifests as what Jung identified as the battery crash phenomenon. You go from 100% energy to complete depletion instantly when surrounded by people. This isn't simple introversion. Jung called it psychic flooding. Jung's introverted intuitive patients described a pattern that confused them for years. They could feel energetic and vibrant alone. Then they'd attend a social gathering and within 30 minutes feel completely drained. Not tired, depleted, like someone pulled their power cord and their entire system shut down. Modern research on highly sensitive persons confirms Jung's observations. These individuals process sensory and emotional information more deeply than others, but Jung identified something more specific in the introverted intuitive type. They don't just process information from social situations. They unconsciously absorb psychological content from everyone present. One patient described it perfectly. Going to a party isn't socializing for me. It's like opening 50 browser tabs simultaneously, while each one plays different music and videos. My system gets overwhelmed, processing everyone's emotional states, hidden agendas, social performances, and unconscious tensions. Within minutes, I'm overloaded. My brain crashes like a computer with insufficient memory. Jung called this psychic flooding. The introverted intuitive lacks normal psychological boundaries that protect most people from environmental overwhelm. In crowds, they absorb everything, every emotion, every tension, every unspoken conflict. Their nervous systems weren't designed for modern social environments where dozens of people congregate in confined spaces. The battery crash isn't weakness or social anxiety. It's biological response to information overload. Jung observed that his patients needed extensive alone time, not because they disliked people, but because solitude was the only environment where they could discharge absorbed psychological content and reconnect with their own authentic energy. The eighth and final sign appears as what Jung considered the most dangerous characteristic, the dangerous awareness. You see the elephant in the room that families, workplaces, and societies agree to ignore. And this awareness makes you a threat to collective unconscious functioning. Jung documented patients who consistently identified dysfunctions that groups depended on ignoring. One patient told him, "I can see my family's alcoholism, my workplace's corruption, my society's hypocrisy." But everyone else seems to have made an unconscious agreement not to acknowledge what's happening right in front of us. When I mention obvious problems, people treat me like I'm creating the issues rather than observing them. Jung realized these individuals threatened collective unconscious agreements that keep groups stable. Every family, organization, and society maintains cohesion partly through shared denial. Certain truths cannot be spoken. Certain problems cannot be acknowledged. These unconscious agreements create psychological stability even when they perpetuate dysfunction. The introverted intuitive cannot participate in collective denial. Their perception is too clear, their awareness too penetrating. They see everything, and their presence alone threatens the elaborate psychological defenses that groups construct to avoid uncomfortable realities. Jung wrote, "The individual with dangerous awareness becomes a destabilizing force not through malice, but through simple clarity. They cannot pretend not to see what they see, and groups cannot tolerate members who refuse to participate in necessary fictions. This creates an impossible situation. You're punished for honesty, excluded for clarity, attacked for awareness. Every system you enter eventually identifies you as the problem because you reflect back the dysfunctions they need to ignore. You're not causing the problems. You're simply unable to pretend they don't exist." But here's what Jung discovered that changes everything. This isn't mental illness. This isn't disorder. This is evolutionary function. Jung spent decades studying what happens when introverted intuitives reach their breaking point. When the isolation becomes unbearable. When the weight of seeing everything crushes them. He documented a transformation he called shadow integration under extreme necessity. The breaking point usually comes through betrayal. Not just any betrayal, but the kind that forces you to finally trust your own perception over others' denials. Your partner's affair you sensed for months, but talked yourself out of believing. The job loss you predicted, but hoped you were wrong about. The family dysfunction you observed for years, while everyone called you crazy for mentioning it. Jung observed that when reality finally confirmed what these individuals had seen all along, something shifted permanently. They stopped doubting their perception. They stopped apologizing for their awareness. They stopped trying to make themselves smaller to fit into collective unconsciousness. Jung called this transition from victim to integrated observer. The introverted intuitive, who successfully navigates this transformation, becomes what he termed a culture carrier, someone who helps collective consciousness evolve by holding awareness that society isn't yet ready to integrate. But Jung warned about the danger of not integrating this gift. He documented patients who chose two destructive paths. Some withdrew completely, using their superior perception to justify isolation and misanthropy. Others became inflated, believing their awareness made them superior to unconscious masses. Both paths led to psychological breakdown. The integrated path requires something more difficult than either withdrawal or inflation. It requires what Jung called conscious humility, accepting that your perception is real and valuable while acknowledging that most people aren't ready for the level of awareness you carry. Using your gifts strategically, rather than wielding them as weapons. Learning to speak truth in ways that invite understanding, rather than triggering defensiveness. Jung developed specific practices for maintaining this integration. Regular solitude for distinguishing your own psychological contents from absorbed material. Conscious choice about when and with whom to engage perceptive abilities. Ongoing shadow work to prevent projection of your own unconscious contents onto others. Connection with the rare few who can provide reality checking and support. Creative expression as an outlet for overwhelming perceptual input. You were born this way, not to suffer in silence, but to serve consciousness evolution. Jung believed the introverted intuitive represents humanity's next developmental stage. You're not broken because you see everything others miss. You're psychologically ahead of your time. This rare type doesn't exist by accident. Jung argued that evolution creates psychological pioneers who perceive realities that collective consciousness will eventually need to integrate. You feel isolated now because you're holding awareness that humanity isn't collectively ready to accept, but your existence prepares the ground for necessary evolution. You're living proof that consciousness can differentiate beyond current collective capacity, that humans can perceive, feel, and understand at levels most people haven't yet accessed. Your suffering isn't meaningless, it's evolutionary labor. Jung's message to every person carrying this rare configuration was clear. Your perception isn't your burden. Your unconscious relationship to your perception is your burden. Learn to integrate it consciously, and you become exactly what humanity needs. Consciousness pioneers preparing society for psychological development that is inevitable but not yet obvious. Right, I see the patterns in the comments. If you recognize yourself in these 8 signs, you're not alone in your experience. You're part of a 1% that Jung believed holds the key to humanity's next evolutionary step. The introverted intuitive isn't a disorder to be cured. It's a gift requiring conscious development. If you're ready to understand more about your psychological type and Jung's revolutionary insights, subscribe to this channel. We explore the depths of human consciousness that most psychology ignores. We validate experiences that society pathologizes. We honor the psychological complexity that makes you feel alien in your own world. Your differentiated perception either destroys you or transforms you into something extraordinary. The choice has always been yours, but now you understand what you're choosing between: unconscious suffering or conscious evolution, isolation or integration, victim or culture carrier. In the alchemist's path, perception training for empaths, you'll turn overwhelm into wisdom with practical drills, Jung-inspired boundaries, and step-by-step perception training. This guide includes 3 exclusive chapter videos to deepen each lesson. Written by Surreal Mind, 236 pages, beautifully designed 8.5 by 11 downloadable ebook, in stock now. Start your training today. Feel deeply while thinking clearly. Get The Alchemist's Path at thesurrealmind.com. Thanks for watching. See you in the next dimension.